Hello, I would like to talk to you about leaflet fluttering in bioprosthetic heart valves. My name is Obrist. I'm from the University of Bern in Switzerland. So, bioprosthetic heart valves are used in conditions of aortic stenosis, like we see here. In aortic stenosis, the aortic valve is unable to fully open and it's obstructing the blood flow. Therefore, it has to be replaced by an artificial device like the one we see here on the right-hand side, a bioprosthetic heart valve. These valves work really well. However, they tend to recalcify and obstruct the blood flow again after maybe 15 years or 20 years in a process called structural valve deterioration, SVD. Now, there are many causes for this SVD. One of them is believed to be leaflet fluttering. Leaflet fluttering is a process where the leaflets of the soft tissue leaflets of the valve are fluttering in their open position. So it's a little bit like a flag fluttering in the wind. We see this here in this animation. It's from echocardiography. Blood is flowing from left to the right. The valve is sitting here, right here, and you should see that when the valve is in open position, it's fluttering a little bit, especially the leaflet on top. You can quantify this fluttering, like this done here on the right, and you see it's fluttering at frequencies of 30 to 50 hertz. There have been a number of experimental studies of fluttering as far back as 1990s, and very recently there were two computational studies focusing on the thickness of the leaflet material, showing that thinner leaflet will modify the leaflet, the fluttering frequency and the fluttering amplitude. Now, we did our own experimental studies. We used the setup like shown here on the left in a positive flow loop. You see here results, an axial view of a valve, and in the open position we see here the bottom leaflet number 3, with small vibrations and O-mode fluttering, and the leaflet number 1 here doing a larger amplitude fluttering is a lower frequency, which we call a T-mode fluttering. Leaflet number 2 is not fluttering at all. Now the valve is closing again, very typically for this type of valve, one leaflet after the other. Next, we're going to see the same thing in a side view. Flows from right to left, the valve is opening, and we see here the oscillating tip, the O-mode fluttering vibration, and later the T-mode fluttering, which is like a whiplash motion from the base toward the trailing edge of the leaflet at larger amplitude. When we quantify these experimental results, we find that this T-mode fluttering occurs at frequencies, I think in that case it was like 36 hertz. It is dependent on the cardiac output, or if you wish, depending on the Reynolds number, with a somewhat higher frequency for higher Reynolds numbers and a somewhat higher amplitude here, around 2 millimeters excursion for the leaflets itself. The O-mode fluttering is a high frequency process between 200 and 300 hertz, and the amplitudes are very small, below 0.5 millimeters. Now, this instability, it is an instability of it's a fluid structure interaction instability, will of course also have an effect on the flow field and vice versa. In order to study this in a bit more detail, it's useful to use a computational model, and we used our own FSI solver that we developed for heart valves. It is using a Navier-Stokes solver, a high-order solver for DNS. It's using 6-order finite difference schemes in space. We use a classical immersed boundary paradigm according to Peskin, where we transfer the fluid velocities as a boundary condition to the structure. For the structure, we have a finite element solver where we solve the full elastodynamics equations, and we return the reaction forces from the structure back to the fluid grid, where they enter the Navier-Stokes equations again on the right-hand side as a force density. To model the tissue, the valve tissue, we use a Holz-Apfel-Glaser-Ochten model with fiber directions of plus minus 30 degrees. Typical results look like the one we show here. In the middle, you see the valve as it is fluttering again, as seen in the experiment. If we plot the shape of the leaflet at different time points from left to right, we see here that we have this traveling wave motion going through the leaflet. And this fluttering is at 40 Hertz in this configuration. The resulting flow field is shown on the left. We see here at the bottom the fluttering valve, and we see that with each fluttering period, a vortex ring is issued from the valve orifice, and this vortex ring is rapidly breaking down, leading to this turbulent flow. So this is suggesting that this valve fluttering is directly connected to the transition process. And you may ask, well, maybe if I can suppress the fluttering, I could also suppress the turbulent flow. So we tried to modify the valve in the hope that we could reduce the fluttering or even eliminate it. So first we modified the material parameters. So we changed the fiber directions and we stiffened the material. However, no matter how we changed the material parameters, the fluttering remained. So as long as the valve was still opening and closing properly, there always was a fluttering. So we went on to do a bit more dramatic changes to the valve, and we changed the leaflet geometry. So not just the thickness of the leaflet, but really the shape of the leaflet. In the middle, configuration number 2, you have the classical geometry as we've seen in the animation before, with a rather large belly curve. We call this curve a belly curve. In configuration number 1, we have a much reduced belly curvature. However, the length of the trailing edge, so the amount of material you have there to open, is exactly the same. So the open valve orifice is constant in both configurations. It's just that this belly curve is reduced. In configuration number 3, the attachment line, the commissure lines, are modified. It's more of a V-shaped leaflet, whereas these two leaflets here are more U-shaped. If we look at the results obtained with these 3 configurations, we get the following. In the middle again, the classical configuration we've seen before, with a fluttering, an intense fluttering at approximately 40 Hertz, a vortex ring being issued from the orifice with every fluttering period, a rapid breakdown to turbulence. Configuration number 1 with the reduced belly curve, interestingly, shows no fluttering whatsoever, so we completely eliminated the fluttering. Nevertheless, we still get turbulent flow, except that the transition process now appears to be based on a shear layer instability slowly developing in the wake of the trailing edge. The third configuration, on the right-hand side, is the most complex situation where the fluttering is asynchronous. So as one of the leaflets is opening up a bit more, the other one is closing and vice versa. So they're not moving synchronously, and the flow past this valve is the most complex with the most intense breakdown to turbulent flow. This is also reflected in the shear stresses, in the viscous shear stresses in the flow. Here in configuration number 1, without fluttering, we have relatively low levels of viscous shear stresses just past the valve, only elevated shear stresses a bit further downstream where we had the breakdown. And here in the configuration number 2, we have much more intense viscous shear stresses, probably related to the breakdown of the vortex rings. Similarly, we also see in the leaflets itself the von Mises stress levels, which are rather high but stable in configuration number 1, and fluctuating like the traveling wave in configuration number 2. So in summary, we see that leaflet geometry is a major determinant for bioprosthetic leaflet fluttering, and that by modifying the geometry the right way, we can even eliminate the fluttering overall. At the same time, the flow still becomes turbulent, except that the transition process is based on a shear layer instability and on no fluttering situation, and is dominated by the vortex string breakdown in the fluttering configuration. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to acknowledge financial support from past and computational resources through CSCS. Thank you.